Welcome to part 2 of my 3-part series about failed live streaming websites. This video will focus on an app called Live.me. Live.me was an app that I used probably during my earlier years of high school. Unlike TinyChat, I did not have a clear path towards what my conclusion was going to be, but as I started to take notes for this video, I ended up coming up with a couple of theories that are congruent with my personal experiences on this app. With that being said, let's jump into Live.me's background. Live.me was launched in the April of 2016. Going on Live.me was very much like going to the circus, as you could be scrolling through your feed and find one person convincing people that they're wildly generous by donating their time to do one free psychic reading a day for a random audience member, while another is hosting a talent show consisting of averagely to maybe even below averagely talented people for the ultimate prize of receiving a follow or shout out by said host. Various content creators of different genres flocked to Live.me to live stream whatever it was that they did. Whether it was art, music, comedy, dancing, or chatting, you could really find anything and everything there. There was really no expected type of content from the community as a whole, which can honestly be a little disorienting, but we'll get to that in a little bit. In modern times, Live.me is not really known for anything, as it had a short lifespan of relevancy and failed to create any notable creator specific to the app. Of course, it has come under fire over the years for graphic content just like every other site of this nature, so it's nothing really new or surprising. Once again, unlike TinyChat, it's harder to see how unpopular Live.me became solely based on the amount of viewers per live stream alone. I suspect there's something off about how Live.me calculates the number of audience members of a live stream. Either way, I want to talk more in depth about all that in the fall section of my video. For now, if we take the amount of viewers per live stream at face value, I would say that the average live stream of a creator on there would be maybe somewhere in between the 1,000 to 5,000 viewers range. Now let's talk about the rise. Personally, I think the rise of this app is pretty straightforward. Before Live.me, Periscope was the app that dominated the mobile space in terms of live streaming. When Live.me launched the next year, not only were people curious about the app, but unlike Periscope, who promoted themselves as a broadcasting app with a specific emphasis on travel, Live.me marketed themselves as a live streaming service for content creators of all kinds. As explored in the first video of this series, digital content creator culture had really cemented itself in the online landscape, being one of the most important aspects of daily life on the internet. This smart decision that Live.me made ended up not only catching the attention of people who consumed content, but also people making the content. It's not like you couldn't live stream whatever you wanted on Periscope, but as I've realized over the years, no matter how a product functions, people take more comfort in knowing that it has been, or at least claimed to be, tailored for an aspect of their lives that they feel like they need to satisfy. For example, when I was in high school, I was a fan of the band 5 Seconds of Summer, and I was also very much into journaling. Therefore, I wanted a journal from Claire's that had pictures of the members on it and was also decorated with doodles/designs related to the band's aesthetics. Obviously, being from Claire's, it was overpriced and I could pretty much buy a journal from the dollar store that would serve the exact same purpose, but at the time I felt like I desperately needed this product just because I believed it was made to satiate my needs as a fan of 5 Seconds of Summer. Once I was able to convince my mom to buy it for me, I deemed it as special and would take better care of it than any of my other journals at the time, all because I was thrilled that I owned something that was created to represent this incredibly specific interest that was a part of my everyday life. The same concept applies to Live.me. People felt that they were part of a community of creators simply due to the fact that the app had said so. Live.me also experienced a lot of growth due to already popular content creators and even mainstream celebrities using the platform to connect with their existing fan bases. YouTubers including Dan Howell, Phil Lester, and Roman Atwood all used Live.me at one point, even if it was for a relatively short amount of time. Having established people participate in this new community acts almost like a shoutout, where even if the person downloads the app to initially only watch the content of one creator, they end up becoming understandably curious and start checking out other creators on the platform. And while I'm sure there were other aspects that contributed to its rise, I feel like talking about all that is not as nearly interesting or important to know about. So with that being said, let's talk about the fall of Live.me. So picture this, I went to VidCon for the first time in 2017. In the expo hall, Live.me had its own lounge which offered a lot of activities for people to do there, as well as hosted some live events such as interviews or games people could participate in to win prizes. I visited the Live.me lounge a lot during my time there, and it was very popular with people lining up to participate in whatever they were doing at the time. Also in 2017, there were many panels that featured Live.me creators. So literally what happened in 2019 when I was able to visit VidCon again, because when I went there was no trace or mention of Live.me anywhere, as if it had never existed. So what happened within these 2 years? Well, I'll try my best to explain exactly what I think took place. Live.me definitely had more focused material than TinyChat did, and that makes sense because Live.me was specifically a place to cultivate live streaming content that was meant to be consumed by an audience. If we look at the creators on the app on an individual level, it's easy to see while everybody behaved like a content creator, they weren't actually very good at creating it. Nobody was able to keep long-term success or relevancy due to not being able to come up with creative ideas to keep their audiences engaged. Once the creator decided what they wanted to do on Live.me, they would just do that over and over again. That combined with the sheer amount of e-begging really sunk the app further down. Between TinyChat, Live.me, and YouNow, e-begging was the most rampant on Live.me. The creators on there were far from subtle. They would often ask their viewers to donate to them in exchange for useless things such as a follow or shoutout from the creators themselves. There usually was never any physical or digital rewards with any monetary value. I estimate around 50 to 80% of any random live stream on there would be made up of e-begging, which would leave the stream devoid of much content, therefore completely ruining both the live experience and any replay value the stream otherwise might have had. Collectively, the creators made the app way too chaotic because they ended up establishing Live.me's ecosystem without a central community. There was little to no intersection of fan bases between the creators, nor was there any discussions about the community at large. Both of these characteristics are essential to the growth of any app or website nowadays. If we take YouTube for example, those who predominantly watch gaming content will still most likely have a basic understanding of the drama, events, and hardships that are present within the beauty community. Because of this knowledge that all communities on YouTube possess of each other, everybody has the opportunity to chime in with their opinion no matter which community is having an issue. With no central community infused with the unescapable repetitive content, there was really no reason for audiences to come back to Live.me after they got bored with their favorite creators, as they could see similar yet elevated content elsewhere. The sharing of fan bases is a very powerful way for creators to grow individually and collectively. Twitch is such a good example of this. It's very clear that creators on there contribute to the health of the website's entire community by supporting and building off of each other. Even if someone becomes uninterested in those they currently watch, they aren't forced off the platform because they can just switch to watching someone else that they were introduced to through the system of intersecting audiences. Speaking of audiences, the relationship between the creators and their communities on Live.me was weirdly cyclical and ineffective. Creators would rarely create environments for creative and/or clever audience interactions. The majority of the viewers would spam basic/boring questions or comments in the chat, and the creator in turn would answer those questions with basic/boring answers. It really just became a circular pattern between both parties that really led to nowhere. As you can imagine, if a creator's content on Live.me was based solely on audience interaction, it would make for a very boring live stream. Creators on Twitch are well known for their relationship with their fan bases, as they often can have hilarious, thought-provoking, or just straight-up provoking moments with them. Which is why, even if they so happen to have a style of content which is slightly less focused than what most people on Twitch go for, they can still grow on other platforms such as YouTube or TikTok, because they can take these moments and create content that is desirable enough for platforms like that. Creators were not able to grow on other websites or apps solely based around their success on Live.me. Even if a creator on there had a YouTube channel, for example, their live stream would most likely be unusable to create engaging videos that people would actually want to see on there. Constant interruptions of e-begging and an uninteresting relationship with the audience can be detrimental to any live streamer who would want to cross-promote their content elsewhere on the internet. Now finally, what I wanted to touch upon in this section that I mentioned earlier in this video is Live.me's audience in modern times. When I revisited Live.me for the first time in years, I was mildly surprised with some of the numbers a lot of the live streams are pulling in. Some of the highest ones had slightly over 10,000 audience members. Now keep in mind, relevancy and the amount of followers or viewers a creator has are not always congruent. Relevancy is more to do with the cultural impact someone makes rather than the actual number of audience members they have. We've seen time and time again that there are many smaller creators that are more relevant than some bigger ones, just due to the amount of influence they contribute towards the culture of the online landscape. So even if Live.me as an entire app has somewhat of a big following, it still fails to be relevant as it doesn't seem like it's known for anything or anyone. Anyways, when I decided to go into these live streams, I paid particular attention to the chat, and what I found is that even in live streams that are labeled with a high amount of audience members, it really seems like the same 2 to 3 people comment in the chat and sometimes gives donations. But other than that, the majority of the audience remains silent and does not actually engage with the creator at all. This seems rather strange, especially for live streams that supposedly have thousands of people watching. So this makes me speculate that either Live.me does not count the number of people watching at the current moment, but instead documents how many people have come into the broadcast in total regardless of who left, or the general audience of Live.me choose not to interact. And while the audience choosing not to interact can be for several different reasons, I believe a part of the reason for the community on Live.me is due to the persistent lack of a stimulating environment for worthy interactions, with it worsening considerably throughout the years. In conclusion, I believe Live.me failed because of the lack of community within the app itself, the disorientation of fan bases between the creators, and the seemingly shameless culture of greed which the creators did very little to hide and even actively encouraged. To me, Live.me felt almost like a show comparable to Instant Influencer because certain people would become famous for a little while but ultimately fail to retain that fame long enough to advance their relevancy online. I hope y'all enjoyed this video and that it painted a decent picture of what I believe led Live.me to its downfall. As always, feel free to ask any questions or voice any concerns in the comments section below. Consider subscribing if you want to see more content like this. My third and final video in this series will probably take a bit of time to make just like this one did, so stay tuned. Thank you for watching.